EC Dreamers, welcome to a very special video because today I am joined by Deepika from Acquireng. Welcome, Deepika.
So happy to be here.
This is amazing to have you here. So we're at the IATEFL conference in Harrogate, and we wanted to film a very special video for you guys. 5 reasons that you struggle to speak English. Now we're coming at this from language learners, but also language teachers. So let's get started with the first one. Distinguishing between sounds.
Yeah. Now, you're a Hindi learner, Tom.
I am a Hindi learner.
I just found that out. That's super cool.
Uh-huh.
What is the one thing that you struggle with the most?
Yeah, so it definitely is distinguishing between sounds, and in particular the t sound. Okay, so one word that I've struggled with is the word tomato, which is tomato.
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 With an R in the end.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
But the t sounds, you were telling me there are like 2 different sounds.
I think there's 3 different sounds actually, now that I think about it.
Okay, 3.
Yeah, so, well, 4. We won't get into the details, but with this sound specifically, it's just really important where you put your tongue.
Right. Yeah. You were showing me like on with the alveolar ridge, like where to place the tongue.
Right.
So yeah, from a learner's perspective, like I get it. Like how hard is it to, to kind of hear one sound and another sound, and
especially because it doesn't exist in English.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so, but our learners have the same problems, right, in English?
Definitely.
I think were you saying like Hindi speakers find it difficult with the v and the w?
Yes.
Because
it doesn't exist. That distinction doesn't exist.
Yeah. You guys watching, I'm sure you have your own examples.
First language.
From your first language, to English. Solutions. Let's find some solutions. What kind of things can students do?
I think the first thing is to start noticing that you're saying something different, and that is the problem. But unfortunately, that is also the solution.
Yeah.
Is realizing that you're not saying the word you think you're saying, the sound you think you're saying.
Yeah.
That's the first step.
Yeah, true, right? Like, and that's probably the hardest part, right? Identifying or observing your own English. Obviously, teachers can help you with that. Like
people you're talking to, people you're practicing with, they're observing you.
Yeah.
They'll definitely help you with that. At some point, you're going to come into this realization that you're not saying the sound you think you're saying.
Yeah.
And that's the first step, is like recognizing it.
Right. And then we need to take action, right? So one solution would be minimal pairs.
With identifying minimal pairs. Words in your language, so in this case, English, that have the same... It's the same word except one sound. I don't know how to
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah, so for example, like the classic one is like sheep and ship, right? It's the same kind of sounds around it, but one sound is different. So sheep and ship, and you can play with that. It gets very rude at some point, like beach and bitch.
The other word.
I said it, I'm sorry. But yeah. So minimal pairs are really useful. You can do them as individually, like one word to another, or you can put them in sentences. Which are really great.
Yeah, it's definitely important to locate them in sentences. Once you practice just the words by themselves, definitely put them in sentences with different words surrounding them, because the sounds often change depending on what's in front and behind them.
Yeah,
so
that's exactly it.
Okay, so the other thing you can do is to actually watch videos, and there's plenty for English, not so much for Hindi, I'm afraid.
Okay.
Plenty for English that explain exactly what to do with all of the different parts in your mouth, because there's a lot of moving parts, believe me.
Right.
Exactly where to put your tongue and what kind of noise to make the sound come out the way you want it to.
Yeah, like the anatomy of sound, which is what you were doing for me learning Hindi with the t sound, where to put the tongue.
Exactly.
Like literally, physically, where the lips go and where's the mouth, where are the teeth, are they involved?
And then keep doing it over and over again, because your mouth, your tongue, everything's a muscle, and muscle needs repetition to build muscle memory, and muscle memory is essentially what good pronunciation is.
Yeah, absolutely. There is a module in my pronunciation course about the anatomy of sound, but there are so many resources that you can find online as well to help you. Our second reason is translation, translating from your first language into your second language, into English. Now, you live in Spain at the moment. How are you finding that? And what difficulties are you finding?
Yeah, as much as I enjoy learning Spanish, it's also really hard. And one thing I find the hardest is going somewhere and wanting to say something, but the words just not coming to me. Because what I'm doing at this very low level of Spanish that I have is thinking the sentences in English first, which is not wrong, which is the resource I have is English, and I'm learning Spanish through English, so of course I'm thinking in English. But forcing myself to go from English to Spanish, I think, makes me stop and not get what I want to get.
Yeah.
And so translating word for word makes me forget the words that I want. Because like 10 minutes later, I'm like, I knew exactly the words I needed. I knew all of the words, all of the grammatical structures I needed.
Yeah.
But it didn't come to me when I wanted it to come to me.
Right. So frustrating. Like afterwards, you're like, oh, I had the perfect phrase. I know it. Like, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I found a lot of my students, for example, one example would be Spanish speakers. They would always say like, I am agree, which is, I think in Spanish, estoy de acuerdo. That's the structure, I am agree.
Exactly.
And they're just planting that into their English language.
Yeah, and then I often say, instead of saying tengo 32 años, I say soy or estoy 32 años, which is the other way around.
The other way around, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so what solutions do we have for our students?
I think in this case, one, you're gonna hate this, but practice.
Yeah.
Practice. But also, like we were talking about with the pronunciation thing, is recognizing what kinds of mistakes you're making, because more often than not, like, you're translating in your head, and so you're making the mistakes that come from your language. So there's plenty of resources out there that tell you, if you're an Arabic speaker, for example, common mistakes that Arabic speakers make while speaking in English.
Yeah, absolutely.
And when you can look them up and try to target the ones that you seem to be making more often.
Yeah. Definitely. You talked about like the patterns, right? Patterns of language that we're taking over. I'll put a bunch of resources into the description below. I think what would be really good is for people to find teachers who are
familiar with these mistakes.
Exactly, like some multilingual teachers who have that knowledge of your language and of English, and they can kind of guide you through that. So
and let your teacher know. Tell them, do the research for them if you need to. Tell them, look, these are the things that I saw online. Can you help me fix these mistakes that I keep making over and over again? Like, help your teacher help you.
Yeah, definitely. As a teacher who primarily sort of teaches British English, I don't have the knowledge of someone's L1 to be able to help them, right? So this is where you need to find teachers from your country who have that knowledge, who can kind of guide you forward. Our third problem is that perhaps you're not able to speak English in the real world. That in your classroom or in a safe space like that, it's okay, you can kind of get by. But when you are in the real world speaking to a shopkeeper or someone new that you've just met, it's difficult. And it's hard, right? Like,
really hard.
Speaking Spanish, we both speak a little bit of Spanish, and in real life situations, I get the fear. But we'll get to the fear later, though.
Yeah,
the fear will come, don't worry.
The fear will come.
Yeah. So how does that play out in real life? Like, what are the problems that people have?
One of the examples that you just gave me was disagreeing by actually sounding like you're agreeing. Or like being very like iffy about it.
Yeah.
Right?
The phrase was could do, right?
And I'd never heard it before.
So an example, right, is if you're here and someone says like, hey, do you want to go to the cinema? And you say, could do.
What do you think it means? Because I was like, yeah, okay, I'll consider it.
Right. Yeah, it sounds like, okay, yeah, we could do it,
that
right?
Sounds like a not bad idea to like see.
Right.
Yeah, like to do.
But in reality, it's a sort of tentative rejection. It's basically like a soft rejection of like, I don't want to do that. Like, yeah, we could do that. It's often followed though by another solution. So it's like, yeah, we could do that. Or and then it's like the thing, right? We could go to the park. And so, I use it all the time, and I've observed myself using it much more as well. And in other people, when someone says to me, oh, yeah, we could do that, I'm like, okay, they don't want to do that. That's fine. Yeah. And this is the kind of language that maybe, you don't learn, in a classroom as such, or maybe you do, but it's the stuff that's like, it's more
cultural.
It's more cultural.
Because if Tom had said could do when I suggested a plan, I would have genuinely thought, okay, he's considering it, because I didn't know that's what he meant.
Yeah. And this is a very British thing. I've actually got a video called "What Brits Say versus What They Mean," which kind of goes through a few of these phrases. But you're raising the point that that's great if you're in a British context, but that changes. Like the phrase "could do" doesn't have that same meaning in other contexts.
Like I said, I've never heard it before, and so I think it's really important to consider what your context is and learn these little phrases that people seem to say in that context in English.
Yeah.
Because it changes all the time. It depends on culture, because British people, as I understand, are very apologetic. And like they like to save face more than, say, for example, an American would do. We don't want to get into like this whole British versus American thing yet, but
yeah, definitely. Like one part of British communication is an indirectness, for sure.
A lot of indirectness, and I'm sure that exists if you can take a moment to reflect on what your culture is like, how your language reflects your culture.
Yeah.
Is it indirect? It's very direct.
Well, that was a great observation that we both had about learning Spanish and how direct it can be. You know, like if you go to the bar and you say, "Dame una cerveza," like give me a cerveza.
Just give it to me.
Whereas here, if you said that to the bar person, they'd be offended. They'd be like, it's a bit rude, it's a bit too direct. So learning the culture of the language, right, is really important.
The culture of the context that you're in.
Yes.
Because English is not a monolith.
Right.
And if you're way over there sitting, well, I'm from India. If you're an Indian speaker learning English and you're going to be in India for the next 5 years, even if you tried to use could do, it won't translate.
Right.
For example.
Yeah, so knowing your context.
Yeah,
totally. Just really quickly, guys, apologies if you have lots of people walking past. We're in the conference at the moment.
We have our tags on.
We have our geeky tags on. It's fantastic. It's been great fun. Our next one is about not getting enough practice, which I hear from my students all the time, and I understand, because maybe they're not in a situation where they can speak to people in English. Maybe they don't go to classes, no one around them speaks English. That's really difficult, right?
It is. And I want to make the distinction between what kinds of practice, because we can tell ourselves that we're getting a lot of practice, but all we're doing is watching Netflix in Spanish.
Yeah.
Right? Sure, it's practice, but is it the kind of practice that helps you speak?
Yeah.
I doubt it.
Yeah, very different. So suddenly, like, having to articulate yourself and produce those sounds, as we were saying earlier, it's a whole different thing, isn't it, to observing or absorbing, language.
Yeah.
I definitely had that when I lived in Spain. I was in a monolingual situation where I was like with English teachers, teaching English with students who could speak English. It was rare for me to get out of that bubble. I don't know if you find the same thing.
Exactly the same thing. And I also seek social situations that help me stay in that sort of bubble of English speakers. And I do live in a town where very few people speak English, so like the circles that I run in end up speaking English.
It's hard. So, solutions. How can we break that sort of pattern?
Find people to practice with.
Okay, find people to practice with. There's definitely, like in Spain, intercambios, I think that's what it's called, language exchanges. That's a great place to start, right?
Yeah.
And you can do that online, obviously. You don't have to be in the same place. I mean, I used to go for coffee with a Spanish speaker when I lived in San Sebastian. That was fantastic. It was great.
Oh, San Sebastian. Oh my gosh.
Amazing place. So good. But you can do it online, right? There are opportunities. And in fact, if you would like to find a language exchange, go into the comments below this video, see if you can find someone who wants to do a language exchange with you. Another one that I did when I lived in Argentina, I joined a kind of language exchange, but it was like almost like speed dating. So
like
it was
a
like
conversation circles type thing. Yeah. Oh, I love
so
that.
There's like 30 of you.
Oh, I'd love to do that.
And you have like 2 or 3 minutes to speak to each one. And I'm an introvert, so like the idea of going and meeting in a room with 30 people and talking to them absolutely terrified me.
Yep.
But it was really great because it was kind of organised, and I knew that I just had to survive for 2 minutes with this person in English or in Spanish, and then I'd move on, and it was an amazing way to practice.
I'm sure it was a great opportunity to repeat certain things as well, because you're like introducing yourself over and over again, for example.
Totally.
Yeah.
Repetition.
So another thing that you can do is, well, you're already watching a lot of YouTube videos, clearly. You're definitely watching TV shows and movies in English, but what can you do with the input you're already getting, but as a speaking practice session? So you can summarize this YouTube video, for example, in your own words and record yourself.
Oh.
You can, if you're reading, if you like reading, which we love, you can summarize you can express an opinion about what's going on in the book and record yourself. Or you can write it and send it to a friend. Here's a book I'm reading, I love it because, right?
Absolutely.
And that's writing practice. So use what you're doing because you are practicing. It's not that you're not, but you're getting a lot of input. How can you use that input and translate that into output practice, which is speaking or writing practice?
Yes, I love it. The voice recorder function on your phone is so invaluable. Yeah, absolutely amazing. Let's move on to our final struggle, which is the fear.
The big fear.
Yeah, and I think we empathize so much. We understand the fear of speaking in another language.
And we touched on it based on the situations that we encountered in Spain and Argentina. Speaking to new people, encountering situations where you have to making appointments, making phone calls. Oh my gosh, I'm scared of making phone calls in English. It's such a nerve-wracking situation, and how do you deal with that?
It's really terrifying.
It is.
Yeah. So a couple of examples. We were saying, I used to go to a bakery in San Sebastian, and the first time I went in, I was so terrified. I just kind of pointed to the thing that I wanted. And thankfully, he was a very nice baker, and over time, he kind of taught me the words, and I was able to just build confidence. But over time, right? So it took me, it was repetition, which is
key.
The key word.
You just have to keep doing it over and over again. So, like I said before, I'm quite comfortable now in restaurant and like bakery food situations in general, having interaction in Spanish, asking what the ingredients are, asking the price, asking for one or many of it, put it in a bag, all of even I would say more advanced than my actual Spanish repertoire.
Right.
Only because I do it over and over again, and I have to do it in Spanish, and I have to make sure that I don't eat things that I don't want to eat.
Yeah, absolutely. So repetition there, really important. And I think we were talking about preparation as well, right? You were talking about an example of preparation.
Absolutely, yeah. If you're going to a doctor, or if you're making an appointment in advance, I think if that phone call terrifies you, which it does to me, and I do this even in English, is I write down all of the important details. I write down for example, when I lived in the US, and people in the US, obviously, they're not familiar with the spelling of my name, so I would, in the beginning especially, I would write down like the NATO alphabet for my name to read it off to them, because they had the right spelling.
Okay.
So it's, preparation to that level is going to make you feel better about having that conversation and getting through it. You have your name, even your spelling, ready. You have all of the details that you have to tell them ready.
Yeah.
And the sentences that you're going to use. Can I make an appointment for whatever? Or if that time is not available, when is the doctor available next week, next month? You know, all of those little words that you're likely to forget, put it on paper. Have it in front of you.
That's it. Yeah, so thinking about the context that you're in, or you're going to be in, and then preparing for that situation. I've been writing a business English book, and for someone who is working for an international company, and maybe you're meeting colleagues, clients, being able to introduce yourself, what's your name, or what's your job, what's your role? Think about how can I explain to someone what my role is in the company?
And practice.
Yeah. So preparing that ahead of time is really important.
And there's nothing wrong with it if you have a piece of paper that you're reading off of. When you have to make sure something's right, when you have to make sure, in high stakes situations, there's nothing wrong with you're no less of an English speaker just because you have to have notes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a structure to it as well. You can obviously think about the context, then just write out, research the phrases that you're going to need, write it out, then practice reading it, and then record yourself. And so there's the stages, take yourself through it, and then eventually, hopefully, you can record yourself without the notes. Check back if you want someone to check it. Hopefully, there's someone around you that could check the information, and sort of guide yourself to the situation.
And finally, I would definitely say that embrace the fear. The fear is always going to be there. Don't feel like you have to vanquish it, because the fear is keeping you safe. So it's not going anywhere. But how can you work with it, and how can you work how can you work to sort of make sure that that's not like pulling you away from the things that you want to do?
Yeah. Often the fear is exactly where you need to go.
Need to be, exactly.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah, that takes you back to that bakery, just having that little tingling feeling of like, oh God, here we go.
Yeah.
Deepika, it's been a fascinating chat. I've really enjoyed it. Hopefully you guys have found some useful tips in there, and some of the things that we've talked about has really resonated, because as language learners, we know, we've felt all the things that you feel. And so yeah, hopefully we've come up with some solutions. If you would like to find out more about Deepika's work, where can they find you?
I'm mostly on Instagram, Acquireng, and Tom will put the spelling in the description.
I will.
Not yet on YouTube.
No.
We'll leave that out.
But you did feature in one of my videos. You've been on one of my videos before.
I have. I've been in one of his videos, really viral ones.
Yeah.
11 Englishes from around the world.
Yeah.
And I talk about Indian English, so if you're curious, go watch that.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I'll put that in the description below as well. But Deepa, thank you so much for joining me.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Thank you so much, guys.
Bye.
Bye.